Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosotris, and I am doing my monthly wrap up for April. So April overall was a pretty good month. It was lots of books through Libby because I finished up reading the Iliad and I've been reading the Odyssey, and so that's been taking up most of my physical book reading time because I'm going through those pretty slow. And so it's been lots of fun books through Libby that I'm listening to an audiobook or reading an ebook in between all of those. So I read 11 books in April total. I'll probably get to 12 because I'm going to finish one tomorrow or the day after, so it'll still be within April, so I'm going to count that. But overall, it's been pretty good. And so for the recap, first thing I wanted to talk about is series I finished in April. And this isn't really a series, it's a duology, but I'm going to throw it in there because it counts. But I finished Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot series. I don't know if there's going to be more books in this, but for now there's just two, and that was A Prayer for the Crown Shy. Overall, I really enjoyed this series. I think it counts more as philosophy in the vein of if you think of Plato's dialogues, where he sets up philosophical questions and explores them by having sort of him and Socrates debating things. It's almost like a script where they're going back and forth and talking. And I feel like that's kind of what Becky Chambers is doing. It's not quite as deep and esoteric as that, but she is able to sort of, with her setup, which is sort of this monk and their robot friend that they meet, and the conversations that they have, they're able to sort of touch on a lot of issues about human nature and the concept of sentience and culture and the things that separate people from animals and the things that separate people from robots. And there's these really kind of profound, wonderful discussions, and it's all kind of framed in this really gorgeous solar punk sort of cozy idealistic future that I found really, really interesting. They're really quick novellas. You can get through them in a sitting. They're really short, but they both act as kind of a break from the chaos of the world, but also a chance to just sort of dig into some big, meaty sci-fi subjects that sci-fi loves to tackle, and just get the reader to sort of ask questions about things, which I really loved. I just realized I didn't have my light on, so now there's light. Okay, anyways, moving on. Next up is series I started in April, and for that, I'm going to have to go with Titus Grown by Mervyn Peake. This is the first book in the Gormenghast trilogy, and this book has been an absolute revelation for me. It's been on my radar for a while. I've wanted to read it for a bit. It just sounded like something that I would be into, and I started reading it, and this is absolutely my kind of book. So I actually borrowed this from the library, and before I even finished reading it, I loved it so much that I ran out on Indie Bookstore Day and picked up a physical copy for myself, because this book is phenomenal. It's hard to classify. It's technically considered sort of a gothic novel. You can call it fantasy. There's no magic or fantasy creatures in it, but it is set in kind of this vast, city-sized, crumbling Gothic castle named Gormenghast. And it looks at sort of the aristocratic family that inhabits it and the servants that sort of support them. And it's very much a fictional world. So it's very much a second world, this. Gormenghast could be set in Middle Earth. It could be set in Westeros. It doesn't really have to be situated anywhere, but it's definitely not anywhere recognizable on Earth. But the story is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just kind of the life and times of these strange, antisocial, weird people who inhabit this vast castle. And there's lots of drama. There's a character named Steerpike who is sort of a Machiavellian character, and at first he seems like he's kind of the hero, but he sort of manipulates his way through the strata of the castle to sort of get himself more and more power. There's a conflict between the cook and the kind of main servant guy, and there's these two creepy twin sisters who had some kind of, I think, epilepsy or something, some kind of brain trauma when they were young, and so half of their bodies are sort of withered, and they both sort of share a mind in a strange way, and they're sort of plotting to take over because they feel like they deserve more power. And then you've got the Countess Gertrude, and then you've got her husband, whose name is Lord Sepulchrave Groan, and the book sort of opens with the birth of their son Titus. So Titus Groan is sort of that character, and it also talks about the manipulations of Steerpike, and it just sort of shows how this strange family, where everyone is sort of self-obsessed and lost in their own thoughts and barely hanging on to sanity, and they're clinging to sort of traditions that don't mean anything, but they're just doing them because they feel like they have to. And the birth of a son introduces sort of a new element, because now there's an heir to the leadership of, you know, all this stuff, and it sort of complicates things. And then you've got Steerpike and all of his manipulations and what that all causes. And the language is probably my favorite thing about this. It reads like Charles Dickens meets Edgar Allan Poe. It's really sumptuous, gothic. It has a lot of really wonderful turns of phrases and beautiful imagery. If you are a former fan of the other author of Good Omens other than Terry Pratchett, and you're looking for something with the feel of parts of like Sandman or American Gods, that kind of thing, this is very much what you're looking for. It also has kind of hints of Coraline as well. And so if you're moving away from that author and looking for something with that kind of quirky, gothic, eccentric, strange, ironic world building with kind of odd characters and the quirky ways that they speak, this is the book you're looking for. I do also want to continue reading this. The second book is called Gormenghast. The third book is called Titus Alone. And each book is kind of slightly different. I know Mervyn Peake was a contemporary of Tolkien. He wrote this in sort of the late 40s, and then the other ones in kind of the 50s. And he was very much sort of reacting to Tolkien. So this is very much a different kind of fantasy, where there's like no world building whatsoever. It's just strange, eccentric people with weird names and bizarre habits and thoughts in this vast crumbling castle that's not explained. We don't know anything about the world that they're on, why they're there, anything. You just get sucked into sort of the twisted, strange lives of the people who live there, and that's it. And it's so compelling, and the way he writes is so good. This is dense writing. If you've read Charles Dickens, you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's dense writing. The language is really opulent and over the top. It's not quite what I'd call purple prose, where it's sort of like opulent for no reason, just for the sake of sounding opulent. But it feels very deliberate and gorgeously constructed. And there's some imagery in here that is just like, there's a description of, at one point, of like a tree, and it's described as having like strange claw-like hands instead of branches, and they're all hanging as if like their wrists are broken. So you've just got this image of this skeletal, creepy tree with all these sort of branches hanging down like broken wrists. It's just gorgeous. I loved this book, and I cannot wait to read the other books in the series. I don't know if it can even count as fantasy, but it definitely feels like a secondary world, so I'm going to call it fantasy. So this is one of my new favorite fantasy books ever. Next up would be my favorite nonfiction reads, but I didn't read any nonfiction this month. They didn't come up on my Libby holds, and so I'm still waiting on some of those. So no nonfiction this month. Moving on. Next up is my favorite fiction standalones, and this one's kind of a cheat because there is going to be other books coming in this series in the future, but they're just not out yet. So for right now, the book is a standalone. And that is The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This was so much fun. Definitely one of my favorite books that I read this month. This is just high adventure. It's swashbuckling. It's searching for secret treasure, pirates, sea monsters, magic, betrayals, a quirky cast of characters. You've got a character who has to kind of get the team back together, which is one of my favorite tropes ever. And it's incredible. It's inclusive, it's hopeful, it's optimistic. There's some really gorgeous sections in here talking about sort of just people from different faiths coming together and having a common goal, you know, even if they believe different things. This is fun, it's rollicking, it's so great, and this is definitely a book that lived up to all the hype. I loved the Daevabad trilogy so much, and this does take place in the same world as Daevabad. It's just set quite a few, like, I think a few millennia earlier. So there are some references to, like, cultures that we'll meet in the Daevabad series, but they're sort of off to the side. But this was so much fun, just a really enjoyable read overall. Next up is books that surprised me, and I'm going to have to go with Forever and a Day by Anthony Horowitz. Now, this is a James Bond novel. It's one of the sort of continuation novels, and it was written fairly recently. I know a lot of the earlier continuation novels that were sort of done in like the 80s and so, they sort of continued the story from the books. They sort of moved them forward a little bit, and they sort of picked Bond up in the 80s and continued on. And then there was a few reboots where, like, Carte Blanche was one of them by Jeffrey Deaver. That one sort of resets the continuity and sort of sets it in the modern day. And there's some good stuff there, but this one is very much, there's 3 books that he did: Forever and a Day, Trigger Mortis, and With a Mind to Kill. And they're set within the original book series. And so Forever and a Day is a prequel to the first book, Casino Royale, and I absolutely loved it. He captures Fleming's writing style really well without sort of copying it. It does feel like he's making it his own, but it feels like it just fits in continuity-wise right into the series. Like, you could read it and then read Casino Royale, and it would just logically progress one to the other. It did have a little bit of prequelitis at times, because we've got sort of a lot of Bond's characteristic things that are sort of his shtick that you'd see in the series. And so you've got, like, you know, the shaken not stirred martini, you've got his specific brand of cigarettes and where he gets them from, and so there is a little bit of, you know, kind of Shakespeare in love kind of thing, where it's like all the things that make Bond you find in here. But it's just really incredible. The way that it starts out very kind of quiet and contemplative. He starts out, he's investigating the death of the previous 007 agent, and in the course of his investigation, he sort of ultimately takes on the 007 number. But he's looking into it, and it sort of feels like a spy procedural at the beginning, much like Casino Royale did, and then it builds to this massive, huge crescendo. You've got the iconic bad guys and all that, and then you've also got a really incredible female love interest who is just wonderful. She stands up among, like, my favorite Bond women in the whole series ever. She reminds me kind of like a mix between sort of Sylvia Trench, who we meet in the first movie, Dr. No, and then Maud Adams' Octopussy, who's like one of the greatest Bond girls of all time ever. And she's complex, she's interesting, she's brilliant, and she challenges him in really cool ways. And I loved this book so much. I did read his other one, the third one that he did, which is With a Mind to Kill, which is sort of set after The Man with the Golden Gun and sort of acts as sort of a bookend to the series. And I did like that one as well, because that one sort of takes on the style of Fleming's later novels, which are much more exuberant and action-adventure kind of thing. And it was a lot of fun. I really liked that one. But Forever and a Day is by far my favorite of the two. This book is just wonderful, and if you're like a huge James Bond fan, you should definitely read it, because it just fits really neatly into the continuity of the series. There's a few continuity errors, but they're really small, and unless you're like a crazed super fan, it won't cause you too much trouble. You just kind of notice them and you're like, okay, whatever, it's fine. But overall, I really loved that book, and I'm desperately looking for the second book, Trigger Mortis, which is set after Goldfinger, which is kind of right in the middle of the series. Libby doesn't have it right now, which is sad, so I can't borrow it, but I am looking for it, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Next up on the list is books that disappointed me, and for this one, I'm gonna have to go with Micro by Michael Crichton and Richard Preston. This is sort of the first book that was released after Crichton's death where another author completed it. There were a few books that were released posthumously that were sort of complete and maybe needed like minor editing and line edits and stuff, but they were primarily Crichton novels. This one was a bit of a disappointment, and I feel like the state of the draft of the novel was very, very unfinished, and that Richard Preston didn't want to sort of step on too many toes by editing it too much. And so there's a lot of things in this one that just really bothered me. Now, there are things that I enjoyed about this. Overall, the plot was very obviously Crichton. It's sort of classic him. You know, you've got a bunch of nerds who are invited to tour a facility where an experimental new technology is being developed, and havoc ensues, and then there's kind of a race for survival as they have to kind of survive and get back, and you know, before it's too late. So it was very obvious that like the overall plot had been sketched out, and there were sort of parts that were very clearly sort of written by Crichton because they had his sort of feel, but there was also a lot of stuff that could have been much more severely revised. Like there would be a section where we'd be inside someone's head and they would say, you know, they noticed a tree, and then they would say out loud, oh look, it's a tree, and then everyone else would be like, let's go to the tree, and you get that repetition of like tree over and over again, and it just drove me crazy. It was sort of frustrating to read. It wasn't bad. I think overall it was kind of a fun tale, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. Anytime you have people being shrunk down and having to fight like giant bugs, survive in the wild when you're like an inch tall, there's gonna be sort of inherent silliness in that kind of plot. And there are lots of moments of like genuinely shocking sort of body horror, which was really well done, and I felt like all that stuff was very much Crichton. But just the way that it progressed, the character arcs, the dialogue was really clunky, and the narration in parts was just really painful, and so it was kind of sad. Now there is still one more book that was written by Crichton but completed by someone else, and that is Eruption, which came out recently, which was completed by James Patterson. And I don't care much for James Patterson, but I'm willing to read it just to see if it's better, because I would really hate for this to be kind of the last Crichton book that I read, because I am a big fan of his, and the quality of his later books was sort of uneven. You got like really good things like Pirate Latitudes and Dragon's Teeth, which were great, and then you've got others like State of Fear and Next, which just weren't quite up to the standards of his other stuff. And so I've been putting off reading this for a long time because I didn't want to kind of have no more Crichton books left to read, but you know, it was kind of a disappointing end. Now there is also another book that wasn't written by him, but is sort of a sequel to one of his books written by another author, kind of whole cloth, and that is The Andromeda Evolution. And so The Andromeda Strain is one of his earliest books, and so I'm curious to read that one, and maybe that'll be kind of a good send-off to the author. But yeah, this one, unless you're a completionist and you're obsessed with finishing all of his books, you don't really need to read this one. So next up, I want to talk about things that I'm looking forward to next month. I'm currently finishing up my reread of The Odyssey. I'm reading Peter Green's translation this time, which I'm really enjoying. I'm almost to the end. I think I have like 5 books left in that one, so I'm almost done with that. And so next month I'm going to have a chance to sort of read more physical books instead of having to read like, because like the big epic poems, they do take up quite a lot of time because I go through them a lot slower. And so then if I read any other books, I have to read them in between those. And so those take up a lot of time. And so next month, I'm going to have a little bit more time to read more regular books, which is great. And so I'm going to be reading Claire North's Ithaca. This is the story of the Odyssey told from Penelope's perspective. I have all 3 books. I've heard this one really highly recommended, so I'm excited to read this one. I'm curious to see how it is. I'm also going to be finishing my Jane Austen read through. I've got 2 books left of hers, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, and so I'm really excited to read those and finish that off. I'm really enjoying. It's funny, I put off reading so many of her books for so long. I don't know why. Every one of them has been really enjoyable and complex, and it's interesting how many of her books aren't really traditional romances. You always think of her books as sort of the template for the Regency romance, but really only like Pride and Prejudice is sort of a template of like the plot follows a romance novel plot that we would recognize today. The others are a lot more about social satire and commentary and talking about like social issues from the point of view of women. And so I'm really excited to read these 2. I've heard Persuasion is one of like everyone's all-time favorite Austen books, so that's her last one, so I'm excited to read that one. So other than that, I am done. I'm really excited for next month. I don't really have anything specific in mind. It's going to be sort of whatever Libby throws at me and whatever books I want to read. Once I finish Claire North's books, her trilogy, I do want to start on the Aeneid. So I'm going to be moving from Greek mythology to Roman mythology. So I'm excited to do that. There's a translation of the Aeneid that I haven't read yet. Shaddy Barch is the translator of the one that I haven't read yet. So I'm excited to get to that one. And other than that, I'm curious to see what you read in April. What was your favorite thing that you read in April? What disappointed you? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next week. And in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.